In the midst of the constant change in our world, do you find yourself wanting to fix things? Well, you're not alone. And what if fixing is no longer the answer? In this mini series, we're exploring what's truly possible, centering in uncertainty, and what that looks like, feels like, and how to get started. I'm Danielle YS, and I guide mission driven women through life and career transitions so they can become comfortable in the unknown and choose their next chapter with clarity.
And I'm Victoria McMahon, and I work within the living threshold field, helping people feel held while the deeper intelligence of their life reveals what is next. Welcome back, everyone. Danielle YS and myself, Victoria McMahon, in part 3 of our series, Centering in Uncertainty. We were talking about living in the either or ideas, fix it mode, instead of stepping into our awareness about being with what is in front of us, what is here, and becoming more able for being present with the sensation, the emotion, the thought that's rising. We move from reactivity to presence and to listening. Today, we delve into this idea that there is nothing to do. And that goes counter to how we've typically operated in the world of doing to fix things and have the answer or resolve and get an outcome. So to have awareness, it's really about unfolding in the experiences rather than reactive fixing tendencies. We're essentially saying to undo these old processes would ask us to shift from the need to intervene to integrating and inhabiting each moment. Danielle, I'd love for you to talk about how you see this way of shaping, given the world circumstance, and how what is operates truly by design.
You called in this idea that in order to undo what is here already, we don't have to do. We can just let it be and let things unfold and express as they need to unfold and express. This is something that I am seeing in our world in a lot of different places. And one of those places that I like to look at, because I did study physics and have a scientific background, is the quantum field, quantum mechanics, and especially quantum computing, where our world is becoming less binary. The world has always been non-binary. The world has always been united and whole, and we as humans have split it into binary, non-binary, or yes, no, right and wrong. This undoing that you were speaking of is really a coming back to the source, a coming back to what's true and what is. And as an example, in quantum computing, traditional computers use bits, which are basically yeses and nos, zeros and ones. And with quantum computing, that's not the case. We have more possibilities because instead of using bits and just this 0 or 1, we now use qubits, which are a superposition of those two and effectively a spectrum between the 0 and the 1. This is a discovery. It's a coming back to the source and what is actually true and not creating something new. Unity has always been there. We're in this place in our world, in our society, where we're coming back to seeing it. So that superposition of the bits, the 0 and the 1, is like in our previous conversations, the sides of the canyon walls. And this superposition really is the bridge in between, the space in between that we're working on inhabiting.
I'm appreciating, as a non-quantum physics trained person, I can resonate with what you're saying through studies of the spiritual realm and awareness through yoga and other traditions. There's a relational field with science and spirituality. And so I can feel it in what you're saying. And we're in this underlying web that we're held in, as we've spoken to in the Threshold series. So science is remembering what's been there. We can see how this shows up in many facets in our lives. You spoke some time ago about how we are moving in our culture, expanding in this non binary awareness. I'd love for you to share about that too.
I also love that you brought in the science and spirituality aspect of it because we've really put them at opposite poles from each other. As a science major in university, as I got deeper and deeper into scientific fields, it became clearer and clearer to me how connected science and spirit are with each other. They're just two faces of the same thing. There were so many people who saw them as completely different. If you were a scientist, you couldn't be a spiritualist. And if you were spiritual, you couldn't be a scientist either because they saw them as very different. And that was a tough thing for me. I think what brought me away from science as a career and into life as a career, unity as a career, because I see them as intertwined. And if you look at some of the greatest scientific minds in our time, they were deeply spiritual. They're not separate from each other. They're so intertwined with each other. In the yogic fields, they also talk about quantum mechanics and quantum physics, and they have talked about it for much longer than we've studied it. Going back to your prompting about other ways in which I see our world shifting from binary into a more non-binary state is gender identity, gender expression. We traditionally have lived in a world of male and female, and if you expressed or identified as anything other than that, it was blasphemy. But now it's part of everyday culture and conversation. Depending on where you live, of course, it's going to be different from rural to urban, different from country to country. And this transition from binary male female into fluidity and nonconformance is also a manifestation of our world and our consciousness coming into a space in between. And it's not so much about which of the binaries you are, it's more about being in that space in between. You can be non binary, but the way in which you choose to be non binary speaks about whether you're in the either or in the what is as well. If you're non binary and you're still attaching to a particular label, whatever that gender pronoun may be, that's still in this either or thinking. It's binary, non binary, literally, and saying, I identify as non binary. Though, if you're in the in between, it's more of a conversation of, I don't identify as any particular label because I'm more expansive than that. And why put myself into a box? Why have other people put me into a box? And that's where this in between comes into play. And that's where this what isness comes into play.
I'm appreciating that culturally it's the expansion of non binary in the gender roles, and it's happening in other cultural ways. I think of the institution of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
When I was younger, it was the binary, you either get married or you don't, you have kids or you don't, and you do it in a sequenced in the box kind of way. And when you weren't conforming, there were opinions, either or thinking. And I have watched over the decades how it's loose and it's not such a tight grab anymore. And now I see in the younger generation, they're questioning whether marriage is part of the relational field. It's not part of the automatic definition that it used to be. So that either or thinking is losing its grip too. And it becomes, how do I choose to express myself in the world, in relationship, from within my own centered self? I think that relates to this topic of centering in uncertainty, because there is a lot of uncertainty as these cultural norms become more fluid.
Yeah, I love that you're calling in this piece of how do I express as who I am. And from our previous conversations, listening the body and being with the somatic body awareness of it, because so much of this has to come from beyond language. We're talking about the gender conversation as well, even beyond gender itself. The language that we use creates binary realities based on how a language is structured. You and I both speak Spanish, and every single noun in Spanish has a gender associated with it. It ends in an O, it ends in an A. It's gendered. Whereas in a language like Chinese dialects, there's no gender. Ta is the word for he, him, they, them. So there is no gender in that language. It's just a person. And it's really interesting that this comes from the human psyche as we've created the structures around us, as you're talking about the structures falling out of place, because we're having to come into the body and into our physical experience of the world and not just the way that we speak about the world or the way that we write about the world.
What's threading through this conversation even more now, how we're actually observing the undoing. It's not happening by us doing anything. It's an evolutionary process that we're observing. How do we take that notion of the collective experience of this undoing and personalize it to our own?
I think similarly to one of our previous conversations in this mini series is that it does start with each of us individually because whatever's going on inside is also going on outside and vice versa. So when we are able to individually step into that space in between and into the undoing without doing, that creates the ripple effect for other people to be called into that space collectively. Nothing that we do as individuals is truly in a vacuum. It's always going to impact somebody else. It's always going to have some kind of shift for somebody else. And so if we can create that shift within ourselves, that invites the shift collectively.
What comes up for me is, what does that shift look like? We like to get into the nuts and bolts of things and be practical about the whole situation. And that first thing is we shift our thinking into there's absolutely nothing to correct.
Yeah.
To feel ourselves a part of and in connection to ourselves, a part of the world, and the world a part of us. It's that realization that we already are part of that underlying unity fabric. And that means we already belong here, and therefore there's nothing to correct or fix.
Can you say more about that fixing part? Because I know that's been a big part of our conversation in the past couple of episodes, and I'm curious to hear more within the space of there's nothing to fix, there's nothing to do.
Yeah, that first thing in unwinding and undoing is pause. Pause for me is that awareness that I've stopped trying to resolve whatever either or thinking is popping in. Stop trying to resolve it. Just pause and recognize it. And then what's the notion that pops in if I am not trying to resolve something? That means I'm not trying to take a side. I'm not trying to choose this is the right way, this is the wrong way. The undoing then simply allows me to be in the unfolding of the experience long enough, stay on the rung, potentially stay long enough in the discomfort to step into the next rung and see how often the undoing gets reorganized automatically. And that's, to me, the magic of Source working with us to help us, support us in moving through the experience instead of expanding into the either or. So those are the ones that come into my mind. And that awareness to recognize that there is an impulse to fix in us. And that's okay. We're working with it. Part of the exploration is pay attention. When does the impulse pop in? And then that impulse invites me to pause. That it's not a good or a bad, that we have these impulses, they're natural, and we want to work with them to move through, to have capacity that we're building to be in our own centered sovereign awareness. I think there's an interesting way in which we can weave that centered capacity. Tell me what you think about doing that in the uncertainty.
I love that you said having the awareness of that desire to fix it, and then pausing and working with that awareness, with that desire, rather than avoiding it, because that avoiding of it is also in the either or, and the judgment of fixing it is wrong. The awareness and the acknowledgement is really important, especially when we're moving through uncertainty, because the acknowledgement gives that desire to fix its own place. You talk about that a lot in having everything have its place. And that's a huge part of how we move forward by being with the what is and not judging what is. When we are judging what is, it would look like, oh, I'm trying to fix this thing. Okay. Victoria and Danielle said, don't try to fix it. That places a judgment on the desire to fix it. That's bad, so maybe I should do something else. And then it keeps ping-ponging back and forth because the desire to fix it is still alive. But when we can be with what is and acknowledge that desire to fix things, it looks more like, oh, I realize I want to fix this thing. Let's pause, investigate in the body why I want to fix this thing. Acknowledge it like you might a child who's crying or asking for your attention. And then once they get that acknowledgement and voice whatever they need, then it releases and allows us to be in that in between space. Things are going to grab us left and right. And so it's this practice of acknowledging and noticing every grab and taking that maybe 30 seconds. It can last longer for sure, but it doesn't have to be an all day affair. To sit with it, acknowledge it, and see what it's trying to tell us. That's where we start to be in the space of play and experimentation.
Can I share an experience I just had recently?
Yeah.
I woke up from crazy making dreams, observing my partner behaving in ways that are the total opposite of who he is. I'm like, what? I wake up and I could feel the body experience of jolted, that sense of uncertainty. This is unreal. I cannot believe he would be doing any of this. And then I took a breath and I just busted out laughing. And that was that pause in the uncertainty, finding my center of that was the most ridiculous dream. How funny that I got to have that dream and see him in these crazy making ways that I would never imagine would occur. And the laughter itself, I could feel my whole body, all the tension of the dream just dissolve. It can show up for us in very funny, odd ways, as well as very real life circumstances. It's the same energy. That's what we're talking about is the undoing. I could have gone a completely different route in response to waking up from that dream.
It's like this Friends episode where Phoebe gets mad at Ross and is mad at Ross for the entire episode. And he keeps asking her what he did. And she's like, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. And then at the end, she realizes she's mad at him because he did something in a dream. And instead of taking that moment to pause and just let it out of her body like you did, she just holds it all in for the entire episode.
Doing, undoing.
Doing, undoing, oh, let it out of your body is the important piece here. There's nothing you need to do. Just let it move through you instead of contracting around it and trying to fix it, trying to do something. That trying word again.
When we are in the awareness of practicing undoing, then we do feel that automatic unfolding of the tension or that automatic joy in the laughter of was that craziness. We can feel it in our bodies. We can sense our thinking mind relax about it so that we are flowing into the next moment. That's why it's such a beautiful example. And then I watched myself get up and go do my morning routine as if, okay, that was my experience. And here we go on to the next one. That's the power and the joy of exploring this undoing way of being in ourselves.
Setting up for our next conversation where
Mm-hmm.
we're diving into making space for what is, what that looks like, what that feels like, how you can get started.
I've given you one experience for that.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up today's conversation, and what are the top three takeaways that you've pulled from today, Victoria?
Fixing it usually comes up when we haven't allowed ourselves to fully feel the experience.
Fixing over feeling.
That's the big one. And so the pause, number two, the pause is that way we invite ourselves into awareness and relationship with the experience so we can stay long enough to allow the alignment of what's next to organically rise. And three is breathe and have fun. Just start paying attention.
Let yourself laugh like Victoria did. Let it out. Beautiful. Wonderful to be here with you, Victoria, and with all of you listening out there. Thank you for being with us. If you have a moment where you were fixing rather than feeling, or when you chose to feel rather than fix, let us know in the comments. It might be what someone else needs to hear today. We'll see you soon.